In the streets of Corinth, the air is thick with smoke. Marble statues, once gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, lie shattered. The cries of merchants, philosophers, and soldiers mingle in a rising storm of panic. Outside the city walls, the Roman legions stand in perfect silence. Their shields glint like the scales of some ancient beast, cold, disciplined, unstoppable. Greece, the land of Homer and Aristotle, the birthplace of democracy and drama, is burning. For centuries, Greek civilization had been the teacher of the Mediterranean. Rome itself had drunk deeply from its cup, its art, its gods, its language, its philosophy. And yet here stood Rome, hammer in hand, ready to break its master's sculpture into pieces. This is the story of how a rising republic from the Italian peninsula conquered the very culture that had shaped it, not in one swift strike, but in a series of wars, treaties, and betrayals stretching over a century. A story of how the proud cities of Greece were drawn, step by step, into the embrace of an empire they could not escape. Before Rome was an empire, Greece was already old. Its mountains had echoed to the voices of warriors in bronze. Long before the first Roman had learned to march in step, this was a land divided into city-states, polis, each fiercely independent, often fighting each other as much as they traded. By the 4th century BCE, the age of Athens' democratic glory and Sparta's iron discipline was fading. In their place rose a new master, Macedon, forged under Philip II and expanded to the ends of the known world by his son, Alexander the Great. Alexander's conquests had carried Greek arms and ideas from the sands of Egypt to the mountains of India. But when he died at just 32 years old, his empire did not pass to a single heir. It splintered, his generals, the Diadochi, carving it into rival kingdoms, the Antigonids in Macedon and Greece, the Seleucids in Asia, the Ptolemies in Egypt. These Hellenistic kingdoms were powerful, but their unity was gone. Greece itself was a patchwork of leagues and alliances. The Aetolian League in the northwest, the Achaean League in the Peloponnese independent cities like Sparta and Rhodes, and looming over them all, the Antigonid kings of Macedon. It was a proud, cultured world, but fractured. And in those fractures, Rome would one day set its roots. Far to the west, Rome was still shaping itself into a regional power. The city had overthrown its kings, embraced the Republic, and built an army unlike any Greece had seen. Citizens who fought not for pay, but as part of an organized body bound by law, duty, and relentless discipline. In just 2 centuries, Rome had fought and beaten the Latin League, the Etruscans, the Samnites, and had clashed with Carthage in the First Punic War. It was a state that adapted quickly, learned from defeat, and never accepted a loss as final. To the Greeks, Rome was distant, a curiosity, perhaps even a useful ally against their own rivals. But the Roman way of war was unlike anything in the Greek world. Flexibility over rigid formations, logistical mastery over seasonal campaigning, political resilience over the fragile personal rule of King's Rome did not fight for mere glory. It fought to remove threats, to bind allies, to secure resources. And once Rome entered a region, it rarely left. The first meeting of these two worlds would come not in Greece itself, but in southern Italy. The Greek colonies of southern Italy, places like Tarentum, had thrived for centuries. They were wealthy, cultured, but militarily vulnerable. When Rome's power began to press south, the city of Tarentum called for aid, not from Macedon or Athens, but from Pyrrhus, king of Epirus. Pyrrhus was no ordinary monarch. A cousin of Alexander the Great, he had inherited not an empire, but ambition. He saw in Tarentum's plea a chance to carve his own name into history, and perhaps to use southern Italy as a stepping stone into Sicily and beyond. In 280 BCE, Pyrrhus landed in Italy with 25 men and 20 war elephants, beasts the Romans had never faced. At Heraclea, his phalanx clashed with the Roman legions. The elephants broke the Roman cavalry. The day belonged to Pyrrhus. But Rome did not sue for peace. The next year, at Asculum, Pyrrhus won again, but at a cost he could not afford. When told of the victory, he is said to have sighed, "Another such victory, and I am undone." This was the birth of the phrase, Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly, it brings ruin to the victor. Pyrrhus's Italian campaign faltered. His allies were unreliable, his resources dwindled, and Rome's resolve never cracked. By 275 BCE, Pyrrhus withdrew, leaving the Greek cities of Italy exposed. One by one, they fell under Roman control. It was a warning to the Greek world. Rome could not be beaten by a single brilliant general. It would take more than battlefield glory to stop the Republic's advance. The spark came not from Athens or Sparta, but from across the Adriatic. In 215 BCE, the Roman Republic was locked in a desperate struggle, the Second Punic War, against Hannibal of Carthage. Hannibal's victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae had shaken Rome to its core. The Republic was bleeding. It was in this moment of Roman weakness that Philip V of Macedon saw opportunity. Young, ambitious, and ruling from the mountain stronghold of Pella, Philip believed Rome's attention was elsewhere. If he could ally with Hannibal and strike across the Adriatic, perhaps Macedon could dominate the Greek cities of the western coast and push into Illyria. But the alliance between Macedon and Carthage was thin and slow to act. Rome, even under siege in Italy, responded with calculated precision. They did not send massive armies into Greece. They sent fleets and alliances. The Aetolian League, hostile to Macedon, became Rome's spear in the east. Roman ships patrolled the Adriatic, cutting Philip's ambitions short. The war dragged on, indecisive, more a chess match of raids and skirmishes than great set-piece battles. By 205 BCE, with Hannibal finally faltering in Italy, Rome signed the Peace of Phenice with Philip. There were no great gains, no humiliations, but in the shadows, Rome had made its first diplomatic footprint in Greek politics. Peace in Greece never lasted long. Philip V soon turned his attention eastward, clashing with Pergamon and Rhodes, powers that were Rome's allies by treaty. The stage was set for a second confrontation. In 200 BCE, Rome declared war on Macedon. This time the Republic was not distracted by Carthage. Legions marched into the Balkans under the command of Titus Quinctius Flamininus, a young general with a taste for both strategy and spectacle. Philip's army was the pride of Hellenistic warfare, a Macedonian phalanx bristling with long pikes, the sarissas, a wall of spears that had crushed enemies from the Danube to the Nile. Against them stood the Roman legion, not a solid wall but a flexible machine of maniples, cohorts, and disciplined maneuver. The decisive clash came in 197 BCE at Cynoscephalae, the Dogs' Heads, a ridge in Thessaly. Fog shrouded the hills as both armies stumbled into each other. Philip's phalanx drove hard on one flank, its forest of spears forcing the Romans back. But on the other side of the field, Roman maniples exploited gaps in the terrain, slipping between the sarissas and attacking the Macedonians from the side. The phalanx, unstoppable in a straight push, could not adapt once broken. By day's end, Philip's army lay shattered. The defeat broke Macedon's power. Flamininus, playing the role of liberator, stood before the Greek cities at the Isthmian Games in Corinth and declared, "The Romans are freeing Greece to govern itself according to its ancient customs." The crowd erupted in cheers, for now they believed him. Flamininus was not lying, at least not entirely. Rome withdrew most of its troops from Greece, dismantling Macedon's garrisons and restoring autonomy to the city-states. Statues were raised to him. Poets praised him as a new savior of Hellenic liberty. But freedom in the Greek world was never simple. Without a common enemy, the leagues and cities soon returned to old rivalries. Sparta clashed with the Achaean League. The Aetolians accused Rome of favoritism. Small wars flared like brush fires across the Peloponnese. And all the while, Rome kept a close watch. Their ambassadors came often. Their fleets visited to ensure stability. Freedom had come with a leash, and the leash was slowly shortening. The next great test would not come from Macedon but from the east, from the vast Seleucid Empire, and a king who saw himself as the heir to Alexander. Antiochus III, called the Great, ruled from the gates of India to the coasts of Asia Minor. Ambitious, charismatic, and a capable general, he saw Rome's new presence in Greece as an intrusion into the Hellenistic world. The spark came from the Aetolian League, resentful of Rome's growing dominance. They invited Antiochus into Greece, promising allies and glory. In 192 BC, the Seleucid king landed at Demetrius with a modest force, just 10 men, far fewer than the numbers he commanded in Asia. He believed Greek cities would rise for him, as they had once risen for Alexander. They did not. Rome responded with speed and force, sending an army under Manius Acilius Glabrio. At Thermopylae, the same pass where Leonidas had once stood against Persia, Antiochus tried to block the Roman advance. But this time, there were no heroic last stands. Roman troops flanked the position through hidden paths, scattering the Seleucid army. Antiochus fled back across the sea. The war followed him into Asia, where in 190 BC at Magnesia, Roman legions and their Pergamene allies crushed the Seleucid forces. The Treaty of Apamea stripped Antiochus of his territories in Asia Minor and forced him to pay a crushing indemnity. With the Seleucid threat gone, only one great Hellenistic kingdom remained to challenge Rome and Greece: Macedon. By the mid-Tuan century BC, Macedon had a new ruler, Perseus, son of Philip the Firn. He was capable, cautious, and popular among some Greek states. Unlike his father, Perseus sought to restore Macedon's power through diplomacy as much as war, forging alliances with Epirus, Thessaly, and parts of the Peloponnese. Rome, however, saw this as a direct threat. The Republic had no desire for a united, resurgent Macedon. In 171 BC, the Third Macedonian War began. Roman forces, led by Lucius Aemilius Paulus, marched north. Perseus met them in 168 BC at Pydna, a battlefield that would decide the fate of Hellenistic Greece. The Macedonian phalanx advanced with terrifying force, its pikes forcing the Romans back step by step. But the ground near Pydna was uneven. As the phalanx pushed forward, its once perfect wall of spears began to break apart in small gaps. Roman maniples slipped into these openings, attacking from the flanks and rear. The slaughter was swift and merciless. By sunset, 20 Macedonians were dead, and Perseus was a prisoner. Macedon was broken into 4 puppet republics. The monarchy, the line of Philip and Alexander, was gone forever. Rome's settlement in Macedon lasted barely 2 decades. Resentment festered. In 150 BC, a man claiming to be Philip VI, supposedly a son of Perseus, rallied rebels and declared himself king. He became known to history as Andriscus, a pretender, but one with enough charisma to briefly unite Macedon again. His rebellion, the Fourth Macedonian War, was short-lived. Rome dispatched a veteran force that crushed Andriscus at Pydna once more in 148 BCE. This time, there would be no pretense of independence. Macedon was annexed outright as a Roman province. While Macedon burned, the southern Greek world watched uneasily. The Achaean League, once an ally of Rome, now bristled under its oversight. Disputes over Sparta's status escalated into open defiance. Rome, weary of Greek defiance but unwilling to let it spread, sent troops under Lucius Mummius. In 146 BC, the Achaean League's last army was defeated at Scarphaia, and the road to Corinth lay open. Corinth, rich, proud, and strategically perched on the isthmus, was the jewel of the Achaean League. It was also a symbol of Greek resistance to Roman control. When the Roman legions entered, they did not negotiate. Corinth's male population was slaughtered. Women and children were sold into slavery. Temples were stripped of their treasures. Art hauled back to Rome. The city was burned, its ruins left as a warning. The same year, 146 BC, saw Rome destroy another great rival, Carthage, on the opposite side of the Mediterranean. With those twin victories, the Republic emerged as the unchallenged master of the Western and Central Mediterranean. By the end of the 12th century BC, the Greece of philosophers, hoplites, and city-states was gone. In its place stood a collection of Roman provinces, client states, and garrison towns. Greek culture did not vanish. In fact, it thrived in Rome's halls, in Roman architecture, literature, and education. But it was no longer the culture of an independent people. Rome had not conquered Greece in one dramatic battle. It had done so step by step, war by war, treaty by treaty. First as an ally, then as an overseer, then as a master. And yet, in the centuries to come, it would be Greek philosophy that shaped Roman law, Greek art that adorned Roman temples, Greek science that guided Roman engineers. Rome had conquered Greece, but Greece conquered Rome's mind. In the shadow of the Acropolis, the columns still stand. They are silent, but they speak of men and empires, of victories and ruins. Rome's legions came with iron, but they left with something else. The soul of a civilization carried westward across the sea. And so Greece fell, not in darkness, but in a strange light, the light of its own brilliance, reflected in the eyes of its conquerors. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Until next time, history remembers. Will you?